So thank you very much. So my name's Robin. I'm from Loughborough University in the UK. I have colleagues here, Jessica Reeves from the University of Nottingham. We're also pleased to be joined by colleagues from the University of Bristol. So we have Dr. Oliver Quick, who's from the Faculty of Law, and we have Dr. John McWilliams from the Faculty of Social Sciences and Law, who specialises in as a professional liaison manager. Before we start the session, as you can see, it's very UK-based. Those of you who are in the industry of working and promoting opportunities in the US, hopefully some of this may be transferable, but for counsellors here, this is just examples of how UK universities operate within helping the employability of their international students. This also has a focus on Indian students today as well. Okay, before we get started, could you perhaps, just by a show of hands, put your hand up if you are a high school counsellor or working within a school? Okay, and then if you are a current delegate from another institution, if you can put your hand up as well. Okay, and everyone else, principals or any other? Okay, great. So we've got a nice mix of students mix of counsellors here and other representatives today. How many of you have sent UK students to the UK to study? Okay. And would you also raise your hand if any of these students have taken internships whilst they've studied in the UK? Okay. One or two. Okay, that's useful. So hopefully after this session, one of the topics of interest will be internships in the UK. So what we're going to do today, we're going to start the session by Dr. McWilliams is going to introduce a little bit of context setting in regards to how universities provide support for international students, what is there, and what advice we would give. Also looking at an example of a successful graduate from India. We're also then going to hand over to Dr. Quick, who's going to explain how, in particular, his faculty, the Faculty of Law, helps students not necessarily just with internships, but to help them become more employable. So it's great to have that academic input. I myself am going to touch on internships and other opportunities within the UK as part of the degree. And my colleague, Dr. Jessica, I've just promoted her. Jessica is going to talk a little bit about studying alongside the study, looking at perhaps part-time work and also what happens after graduation and those jobs following on from that. Okay, so these are our titles here. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dr. John McWilliams, who's going to run his session. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rob. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming out so early this morning to see us. So yeah, my name's John Williams. I'm the Professional Liaison Manager at the University of Bristol, based in the Faculty of Social Sciences and Law. And I'm going to sort of get in later into what that means and what I do exactly in that role. But firstly, I just wanted to start, I thought I'd just risk a little bit of background to the sort of changing face of UK universities in recent years to try and paint a sort of positive picture of some of the changes. So I think there's been an increasing view over many years that universities, by government, the UK government, that universities can be a real driver for economic growth and prosperity, both for the whole country but also for individual students, and also for a driver of more general social change and benefit. The whole civic university agenda has kind of become more and more important in recent years. And one of the ways in that's reflected is the importance of the research impact agenda, which you'll hear quite a bit about. So in the old days, academic research often used to be simply research judged for its own benefit, but more recently research is being judged by the government in terms of how it impacts wider society, and a certain percentage of a research score by the government as part of the research assessment exercise is governed by how it impacts wider society. So, and I think I'll come on to the sort of implications of that later. Another thing that's happened is there's been an ambition amongst governments to get more students into higher education across the UK, along the lines that it's a general benefit to society if more students go into higher education. And at the same time, fees have increased for home students in the UK. So I think as a result of that, universities in the UK are much more outward facing than they ever have been before. Universities invest and the government invests in research that has a partnership angle. Academics are actually doing research with external partners as a standard part of what they do now. Also, employability and engaging students with the outside world as part of their degree programme are now priority areas of kind of all university strategies. So the university I'm at, the University of Bristol, is one of our main priority areas of the strategy is employability of students. And I think that's just true across the sector for all some of these reasons I've just sketched out. You could talk for ages about the details of that, but hopefully that just paints a bit of a picture of a very changed UK university sector. A couple of decades, but certainly the last 5 years, that sort of stuff has been ramping up, and so universities just are now very, very outward-facing organisations. And I think what the upshot of that is, it's a real benefit to students studying in the UK in terms of their employability. So the academics who are teaching them, and you'll hear from one, Dr. Quick, in a minute, are just doing much more externally engaged research as a standard part of what they do. So the academics who are teaching students are just naturally in the other side of their work very engaged people, networks that students can benefit from in informal ways. Also, universities have much larger career services that offer a much wider range of activity than they used to. It's not just about careers counselling and the employer milk round. They now do all kinds of interesting and engaging activities for students, and certainly the University of Bristol Career Service does, and I know that career services around the sector do as well. Placements are now increasing part of degrees, and we'll hear some examples of that. More and more institutions are launching these, and actually, just to mention Loughborough, Rob is from Loughborough. Loughborough is a real kind of one of the trailblazer universities in offering a lot of placements. Bristol has been a bit more behind on that, but universities like Bristol are starting to do that much more, and again, that's true across the sector. Real-world projects are much more commonly part of degree programmes. There are organised external mentoring schemes, more speakers on campus from external organisations, and actually a lot of universities now have dedicated help just for international students. In fact, I dare say all or many do. And also, and this is now coming on to the bit that I actually do myself, where there are now specialist teams within universities and within faculties, schools and departments actually whose job it is to just engage external partners, and that is what I do. I used to do it for the Faculty of Engineering at the University of Bristol, and that office still exists, the Industrial Liaison Office, and I've recently in the last couple of years set up a thing called the Professional Liaison Network within the Faculty of Social Science and Law, which does a similar job. Our job as an office is actually simply to engage external partners in various things, both for research engagement but also for students. And so what we're creating is this really interesting network of connections that benefits the whole of the university, the whole of the faculty, and students gain from that in the ways that I'll just quickly outline now. So see this as a kind of case study, if you like, of a little area of what I would see as a broader changing face of UK higher education. So basically the thing that we do, which is a bit different, is we engage students with organisations that are relevant to their academic subject. We think this enriches their academic study for its own sake, but of course it helps students think about possible paths after graduation. So the kind of model is a portfolio of activities. It's embedded in and springing from students' academic discipline. It's leading from academic research links and creating a network that's open to all equally. A lot is talked about. Some people come into university with a certain network and they stay, that network stays and it gives them a lot of benefit. But this tries to open a network out equally to everybody. This is a network that is a kind of equal opportunities network for everybody. All students come, they drop into this network and they gain benefit from it. Just a few examples of what we do. I'll just kind of rush through these quite quickly, because I'm slightly running out of time. We have a mentoring scheme. We link students up with people that study their subject and using it out in the wider world. Students have a choice of sector or mentor. Mentoring happens in small groups. There's an initial meeting which we organise, and then students meet up with their mentor separately. And again, that's kind of proactively sort of giving students this network. And by the way, this applies equally to home and international students. This happens together, so it benefits everybody. But the point is the kind of proactivity of it. It's not just saying you should go out and network. It's actually sort of helping students doing the networking for them a little bit. So they have a meeting with their mentor at a sort of big dinner event like this. And then we have a series of activities, a personal reflection, action plan, and a prize for the best. So it's a kind of managed scheme. We also get speakers in to speak to students who, again, are graduates of their discipline. So they might be, economists talking to economists, lawyers talking to lawyers, and so on. But what they do is an honest appraisal of their role. We insist that speakers do that. It's not a graduate recruitment talk. It's a different kind of engagement. It's not just about saying, come and work for this company. It's fantastic. It's about saying, this is me. This is how I use my degree subject in the wider world. These are the pros and cons of what I've chosen to do with it. And so again, and also there's an opportunity for networking with the speaker. And there's a few examples of the kind of inside track talks we've done. Economists working in government. My career as an economist working in public health, and so on. So another thing we do, another kind of specialist thing, is there's lots of different internship schemes around the sector and even within the University of Bristol. But the scheme that we run, it specifically targets students to develop, the social sciences students to develop and use their quantitative skills. So students work on real world problems for the likes of charities and social enterprises, and particularly using their social sciences skills to solve a kind of real problem. In particular, they do a lot of evaluation of organisations' activities. So in the charity sector, it's really important to be able to evaluate and show that your activity is of benefit, and that's exactly what social scientists do. So we put social sciences students together with charities to help them do that, and it's a really mutually beneficial scheme, and it's kind of an example of that kind of academically specialist specific scheme, which we think is really providing real kind of employability and sort of academic reflection benefits to students as well. We've also, so Bristol, as I said earlier, the likes of Loughborough and other universities in the sector have been doing placement years as a kind of standard part of their degree programme for a very long time. Bristol hasn't traditionally done large numbers of placement years, but we're actually starting to do different kinds of placements, a different kind of model. We are starting to do some more placement years ourselves, but another thing we're doing within our faculty is sort of shorter placement units, so a kind of 20 credits out of a year rather than an entire year. So you do a placement unit, you do a day a week in an organisation, and then that placement is assessed via reflective report. So it's a bit like it might be seen like a kind of mini year placement. That's a kind of assessed part of the course rather than a kind of full year. So again, it's part of this sort of portfolio model. Students are getting some kind of external engagement, knowledge of a sector, transferable skills, seeing how their academic disciplines are actually used. And so I think that's a really interesting development as well. Also, again, a similar thing, a cross-faculty alumni networking event. So we actually hired an actor trainer who actually trains people on how to present themselves and how to network better. And then we got him to get students together with alumni to sort of so they actually gain a network, and they also learn how to network better as part of the event. So that's another kind of thing that we're doing, really trying to improve students' both networking skills and their actual network. And there's just a list. There's a nice logo later on in the presentation, which is much better than this, but it's just a list just to give a sense of the sort of range of organisations that we engage with. Again, I think this is a kind of nice little map. It's not in any way complete, but it just shows you these are just some selected lists of organisations that professional areas and networks engaged with in the last couple of years. So again, I think it goes back to my point about how engaged the university sector is these days. This just shows you, so it ranges from the City Council, central government, big organisations like Lloyds Bank, Office of National Statistics, but also lots of all the organisational lists you haven't heard of are very likely sort of small, local, Bristol social enterprise and charities, which is again a really important part of the kind of engagement, the civic university agenda, which we're really trying to push and develop. we also have a couple of special initiatives just for international students. One is a sort of scholarship for internships for international students completed in their home countries. But also, and this is actually why I'm in India, why I'm travelling at the moment, because obviously my job, unlike many colleagues here, doesn't involve travelling very regularly. But the mentoring scheme, we're actually launching, the mentoring scheme I described is obviously home-based, international students participate, but the mentor is UK-based. But we also now have a mentoring scheme for international students, or we're just about to launch it in their home country, acknowledging the fact that network in home country is really critical to international students. We're hooking international students up with people that have studied their subject and are now back in home country doing something interesting or useful or relevant to that subject. So again, it's another way of increasing students' networks, but this in a specialist sense, acknowledging that for an Indian graduate, networks in India are going to be really, really important to their future career development. So that's a kind of new thing. We're just literally, Dr. Quick and I are here launching that scheme right at the moment. I'm meeting mentors later today, actually. So what's the upshot of all this? I suppose I kind of covered this already, but so students have done a portfolio of employability-related and subject enhancement activity by the end of the study. They've increased their subject specialist knowledge and got deeper understanding of the use of their academic disciplines out in the wider world, and hopefully enriched their study whilst they're at it, and hopefully done better at their study. They've got a wider network of relevant people, including international students in their own country, good knowledge of sectors for which people use their degree programmes. And as I said, I think all of this is employability positive. Just to mention one case study, not a social scientist, but from my previous faculty, engineering, where, as I said, I ran a thing called Industrial Liaison Office, which did similar initiatives, but engineering focused. This guy called Sheikh Abdul Malik, I knew him very well. I know him very well. We're seeing him in Bangalore in a couple of days' time. He's an aerospace graduate. He engaged with all of Industrial Liaison Office activities and lots of career service and other activities as well, which is fantastic. And he was a really kind of proactive, engaged student, availing of all the opportunities that are out there. And what's interesting is he sort of did all sorts of different internships with big corporates, and internships with smaller organisations and government agencies. And what he ended up doing is setting up this company called Deccan Air Sports, which is trying to be the first company in South India to launch balloon flights for people, commercial balloon flights. So he's ended up sort of using his aerospace degree in a very interesting way to launch a sort of ballooning enterprise. And I really would urge you to Google Sheikh Abdul Malik Bristol, and as you see, there's quite a bit of press about his organisation. And the Deccan Air Sports also involves another Bristol Aerospace graduate who has also got some interesting space-related enterprise course. So if you sort of follow the kind of web through these graduates, they're all doing these really kind of interesting things with their degrees, and I think they're a nice demonstration of how engaged students in the UK system really kind of can go on to be inspired to do interesting things and have done, and I think have sort of used their engagement opportunities they've had at Bristol to kind of launch themselves. And again, I think that this could apply to lots of the opportunities that are going to be talked about later as well. So I think with that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Quick, to talk about law initiatives. Thanks.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Delighted to be here and to share this panel with John, Jessica and Rob. My name's Oliver Quick and I teach law at Bristol, particularly criminal law and medical law. And most of my academic research and writing is around safety in healthcare and I suppose the role that law and regulations and policies can play in trying to improve safety in healthcare. And just reflecting on a point that John made, I thought it was a really good point, that as academics do more and more research, particularly kind of external research dealing with government agencies, regulators, in my case prosecutors, that are engaged with enforcing law in practice, that's obviously great news. Well, it's good news for me because I get to do interesting research, good news for students I teach because they get to hear about it, but also good news for them in the sense that they get to rub shoulders with some of these people that I will interact with in conducting the research that I'll invite down to Bristol to give guest lectures or to do a seminar, and actually help students think about their own careers, perhaps think about non-standard jobs that they may be interested in. So most law students will begin their degree clearly with a job as a lawyer in mind, but actually, quite a significant number, probably about 30 or 40%, end up in non-law careers. Therefore, the fact that they can interact with people that we engage with whilst conducting research, I think, is a benefit to them. I think the first point I wanted to make, and maybe I would say this as somebody who teaches a degree course, is that we shouldn't forget that students can really enhance their skills whilst doing the degree itself. And actually, even if we didn't have any of the excellent provision there is around internships, placements, mentoring, all the kind of skills activity, the explicit skills activity that surrounds the degree, actually, I think we shouldn't forget that doing the degree itself well and engaging with all the kind of opportunities that study presents itself is clearly helpful from an employability perspective. So I think this is a pretty obvious point, I suppose, but I guess it may be at risk. There's a risk that we kind of separate out sort of education and employability, and that students only think about employability in terms of doing internships or doing placements. So, I teach law, and some of these are perhaps more prevalent to law, but I think most of them are fairly general to whatever degree students study. So, knowledge and being curious, trying to analyze, trying to form and think about arguments, reflecting on arguments, reflecting on materials, exercising good judgment in terms of what to read, how to be scholarly in the way that students conduct their studies, and also taking care in the sense of, particularly around assessment, when students are writing coursework assignments or preparing for exams, being very careful in the way that they prepare and present their work is clearly important for their studies, but also important that they learn these skills when they're interacting with employers. We hear a lot particularly from law firms, who are extremely pernickety when they're assessing student applications for internship schemes or jobs thereafter. And, it may sound a bit unfair, but the odd missed full stop or comma here or there can sometimes make the difference when you're talking about a highly competitive industry. So I think trying to instill in students the need to be scholarly and to take care in their studies, and particularly around written assignments, is really important. Okay, but I suppose it's not enough just to be scholarly and to take care around one's studies. I think, we are in a world now where there are lots of opportunities, maybe too many opportunities for students to engage in extracurricular activity that will enhance their skills and make them a bit more employable. And these are some of the kind of main things that are offered in law schools around the UK. And they're all fantastic opportunities for students, not only to enhance their learning, but also to, of course, enhance their skills. And I remember myself as a law student actually being somewhat terrified by some of these opportunities. So mooting, I don't know if anybody's heard of mooting. It's a rather peculiar kind of mock trial scenario where students pretend to be advocates, barristers, and they pit their wits against each other, and they compete, they get on their feet, and they present their arguments why a particular person should be prosecuted, or why a particular person should be able to sue or for a breach of contract or whatever it may be. That's actually quite scary to do as a young undergraduate, but I think most students would say that they're very happy and glad that they did that, because it does push them out of their comfort zone, and getting up on your feet, having to present, does make you think carefully about what you're going to say. You tend to remember what you said because you've had to communicate it to others, so you learn a little bit more, but also you improve your skills of confidence and public speaking. Debating is perhaps an obvious one that's kind of a long tradition in all universities. Some of the more specific things that go on in law schools that I've observed and have been really impressed with how and seen students develop through their academic careers. Negotiation competitions. We know how important skills of negotiation are in life generally, but in most jobs. And law students will enter competitions where they'll have a set of facts, a story, and they will have to negotiate with the other side in time conditions and make difficult decisions about strategy and judgment, what to concede, what not to concede, to try and come to some agreement. And I've been really struck by how students have really kind of got that and really kind of found it quite an exciting thing to engage with. Similarly, mediation, we know that's becoming increasingly important in the legal sector. So programs that specifically test skills around mediation are fantastic. John's mentioned internships, and I know that Rob is, I think, going to talk about internships in more detail, so I won't say too much, only to say that I actually set up an international internship scheme in Bristol a few years ago to support and help students find internships back in their home country during the summer. I've been really struck by how helpful they found it, not only for their future development, but for the study of the degree itself. So we asked them to write a reflective account when they complete their internship, and we only give them 2 questions, how has this helped your study of law, and how has this helped your personal development? And it's been quite, they're not all excellent, but the good ones are really good, and it's quite pleasing to see students respond meaningfully to those questions. Final 2 points, and then I'll stop, because I think my time is probably up. Student societies are probably as old as universities themselves, but now there are a wide array of societies in universities, and some of these are sort of small companies, actually. Students are managing budgets, they're negotiating with large employers, law firms, they're arranging events, they're providing lots of excellent activity, which is great for the student body at large, but for those who've got the initiative, who decide to put themselves forward as the president or secretary, these committees seem to get bigger and bigger each year, as students have an eye on their LinkedIn profile and their personal development. I think it's really, and obviously as academics, we want to make sure that they have a balanced diet there between their academic studies and their extracurricular activity. But I think there are great opportunities for students to learn, real-world skills. So when they go in that interview room, they're commercially aware, they're quite savvy, they've got good practical skills, and they can demonstrate that. They've got some evidence to back that up. And the final point, I think, again, John touched upon this, Alumni Network. So I currently am the alumni liaison person in my school in Bristol, which is a nice job because I get to keep in touch with some of my former students, but also I get to kind of connect them up with some of my current students. Some of the schemes, such as internships, are a real pleasure for me because I get to introduce current students to former students and then just let the sort of magic happen, as it were, and they can interact with each other, and that's a real sort of pleasure, but also I'm sure, very useful for all concerned. Okay, I'm going to stop there, but very, very happy to take questions at the end of the session.
So at this point, I'm going to introduce internships in the UK. It's a slightly misleading slide because there's 2 words there that are very confusing in India. Okay, first of all, sandwich, not this, okay? Secondly, placement. Quite commonly in India, that's referred to getting a job, okay? So what this section is going to identify is internships within a degree. However, when you're applying for courses, and the UK, basically the way the UK sets this out, is this is usually called either a sandwich course or it's called a placement year. Placement meaning that we would place you or help to place you in a company for an internship. Okay. So typically, as you probably all know, a UK degree is 3 years, but there are options of doing a 4-year course to include maybe an MEng, an MSci, an integrated master's year. A 4-year course would also include a bachelor's for 3 years with an internship, which is what I'm going to concentrate on. So that's commonly 2 years of study on campus. A 3rd year is then spent either around the university, in the local area, across the UK, or overseas, where approved by the university. And then that is then complemented by the final year. Okay, so there are many benefits for the internship, which is what we'll come on to a little bit later on. But what we've had feedback from the faculty is to say that, on average, those who do an internship generally increase their performance in the final year by 20% ahead of those that don't. Because they're very switched on, they've had this experience. If you like, you're dangling the carrot in front of these students. You're saying, this is the possible job, this is the goal, and they're then a lot more proactive in doing so. It's also an opportunity not only to get experience that's going to be relevant to that job. It's quite nice that the students get an experience of earning money in the UK as well. Everyone likes earning money, of course. However, there are some internships that are paid a lot more than you can imagine. Okay, so we'll come on to what they would pay. However, there is also a little bit of managing expectations in here. There will be many jobs that students from the UK and India and other international backgrounds will be applying for. Some, for example, in social sciences or in psychology, may not be paid. A lot of students come to me and they say, Rob, I want to do political science. And I say, great, fantastic, good choice. What do you want to do in the future? 9 times out of 10, I want to work for the UN. Okay, I'm not sure how many jobs the UN are going to be creating over the next 20 years, but they certainly need to be based on the demand. So what we also would say is that there's a lot more value to an internship than just being paid. So in certain areas, they may not offer paid work experiences, but the value of it will more than outweigh a little bit more pocket money for students. In some areas, students actually, when it comes to finding the internship, they already know where they want to go. They already know, I want to go and work in a family business, or I want to work in London or something like that, which is usually fantastic. However, we also do a lot of hand-holding, to be honest, with these students, because it's the first time they've perhaps ever applied for a job in their life. So we give a lot of support with students by letting them interact with companies, so creating career fair opportunities for these students, either on campus or in the local area. We give a lot of support with interview skills, with CV workshops, and even having a LinkedIn profile, which a lot of students think, I don't need to go on LinkedIn. My father's on LinkedIn. I don't need to do that until I'm a graduate or I do my master's or PhD. But in the UK, an increasing number of companies actually shortlist via LinkedIn. So do think about that. One thing we would encourage is that if you are counselling your students, it is a lot easier for visa purposes for the student to apply for the course to include an internship via UCAS. There is a possibility, of course, of switching from a 3-year degree to a 4-year degree, but that may include travelling back to India and paying once more for the visa application fee, which nobody really would want to do. Students obviously get paid for this internship where possible, but what we've said is that you don't actually pay the tuition fee to the university for that year because the student wouldn't be getting that tuition. There is an administration charge, commonly between 10 to 20% of that tuition fee for that year, but then the student in turn, if they are offered a salary, they would use that money obviously to fund, to travel, to expense their living costs for that year, and obviously to pay back loans and other things that they may be taking and studying. Now, it may seem silly, but there are actually some universities that offer courses which are 4 years, and it's compulsory to do a 4-year course. The 4-year course may include an internship. So, for example, at my university, Loughborough, for our business students, so not economics, but for our business students, the courses are 4 years. Okay? So students have to do either an internship or a study abroad year. The reason why we do it is that our dean has seen such a vast change in those students who have gone from not having any work experience at all to getting that work experience, then he's basically made it compulsory. So we want our students to become as employable as possible. And we have, on average, 35 to 40% of our students who do an internship year get a job offer from the same company. And that's including international students. What we would say to that is that not all of those students take those jobs. But by giving them and essentially forcing them out of their comfort zone and into the world of work gives them fantastic opportunities there as well. We also offer many courses in engineering where if you take, for example, a mechanical engineering placement year, you actually can count that year towards your chartered status as a mechanical engineer through the IMechE. I think possibly Bristol. I know there are 3 or 4 other UK universities that offer that option, but not many more than that. So what that means is that typically if you do a 3-year degree to get your chartered status, it may require 3 or 4 years post-graduation work experience. A lot of these universities are now looking at options like Loughborough to have that 1-year internship counting towards that chartered work experience, which is really, really useful as well. You will get visited by university staff members, whether you're in the UK or abroad, to make sure you're doing okay, make sure your job role is as expected, and more than anything, to make sure that you're not making cups of tea and doing photocopying. Okay, that's a complete waste of everybody's time. But what we ensure is also that the companies are happy with the student, because if we're a win-win on that situation, that company is more likely to come back to us next year and say, great, we'd like to take 5 or 10 students this year. We only took 2 last year. So that's the kind of thing that we're looking at. At Loughborough and at other universities as well, you can actually get a formal qualification by doing this internship. So you'll actually finish with a bachelor's degree or an MEng if you're taking the joint, which will complement a diploma in professional studies. So it's actually a qualification that you get alongside your degree, which you can show to your next employer that you've had this time and invested that time. There are also summer internships as well, so they don't have to be structured within the degree. There are universities that have options within the 3-year degree to take an internship. There are also options to work over the summer. So not all of our Indian students go home at Christmas and Easter, for example. They stay, they get some work experience, and that could be a good option for them as well. What we've also looked at is basically how valuable these internships are for industry. And just referring to the first bullet point there, we can basically look at 3/4 of the top firms who are taking students offer summer internships, and a little bit more than that, 3/5 are actually offering them internships. So it's not you're going to be working necessarily for a really small business. There are options to work for some of the big recruiters in the UK as well. And then going down, they've also argued that 1/3 of graduates who have had no previous work experience are very unlikely to get the job. Okay, so that's not saying students won't, but looking at the chances in the competitive market, we can certainly argue that there's a very good chance and there's a very good opportunity for students if they're taking an internship as well. And then you can see research at Nottingham suggested that almost 30% of roles are filled by students who have taken an internship at that university, at that company rather. So that's certainly food for thought. These are just an example of some of our partners. There are many more across the UK. We offer a careers fair every year where we have 250 plus companies come over 2 days every year to meet students. So an undergraduate student would potentially have 4 interactions with some of these companies on campus. So that allows us to run a fantastic careers fair, which is currently the largest in the UK. Those companies are quite often manned by Loughborough graduates, so it's a really good opportunity for students to get advice from somebody who's doing the job, because 2 years ago they were in that same position. At Loughborough, as some of you may know, we're also quite famous for sports. So what we've looked at is the employability factor for those who are perhaps looking at slightly different routes. So we're very famous for cricket. We've had a couple of students in the last few years go to Australia. One's been to Tasmania, one's been to Sydney, to undertake what we call a 6+6 option. So that is where he's got a professional contract with a firm, or he has had 2 firms offered internships for those students, but for the further 6 months, they've basically complemented that with playing professional cricket. So they're getting a salary, they're doing some coaching, they're getting some fantastic opportunities, but they're also getting potentially scouted by the Australian cricket selectors. So that's an amazing opportunity. So a 6+6 where options to not necessarily just do a full internship, that can be complemented with playing elite level sports, or also looking at options to do a study abroad year as well. So that could be a 6+6 option. So just talking about study abroad, because it's perhaps a little bit overlooked in terms of in the employability context. Again, it will be in the 3rd year, and it can be taken in place of an internship. However, that can be also taken along with an internship, being a 6+6, as we've discussed. That is a fantastic way of getting that global recognition, and some employers actually feed back to us that in some cases it's better for them that a student has studied abroad or perhaps had 2 or 3 different languages in their portfolio, rather than necessarily just getting a job. So that is something to argue. It can certainly lead to those global opportunities for those who are really into languages. You know, for most Indian students, their second language is going to be English. If they do Spanish, German, French, or any other language, and they're able to spend time on their study abroad year improving those language skills, that can also lead to fantastic opportunities as the world does develop internationally. So again, that can lead to a diploma. For example, that can lead to a diploma in international studies from some universities. There is usually no additional fee to that, so that is normally complemented within the tuition fees that you pay to the home university in the UK. And then accommodation is usually provided very close or on campus through that partner university as well. So students can study something completely different where permitted by the school, but typically it's something that is either more language-based or they are studying something that complements their home degree that they're studying in the UK. Okay, a few other things to consider is obviously applying for jobs quite early. There is a common misconception that there is no jobs in the UK, and when I finish my degree, if I apply for a job, there is nothing available. It's being really prepared, even for the internships. It's looking even a year ahead of when that internship would start, and that's what we would do at most of our universities. We are making sure students are prepared. There are even employability modules given in the first year. Okay, so it's not just, okay, fine, I've finished my degree, panic, I now need a job. It's done and structured in very, very early within the course. There is a new area we're looking into as well, which is called an entrepreneurial year. So instead of doing an internship or a study abroad year, students can actually spend a year developing their own business, okay, through entrepreneurship links. The only current caveat to that is that currently the UKVI will not allow students to trade during that year. However, they can certainly do entrepreneurial skills with other businesses, and they can certainly work on their business within 6 or 12 months of that study abroad or placement year. So there is a good option for that. And also for those thinking perhaps a postgraduate degree in the UK will be more of a benefit to students, or perhaps even some of you here. There are many internships that are being structured into master's degrees now. So we're having this 1+1, for example. So at Loughborough, we offer an MBA program, which is 1+1. So 1 year of the MBA course, which would require work experience, plus 1 year's internship that we help to provide in the UK, and we cover the visa for that year. Okay, so those are some things that students are demanding, particularly in the Indian market, and that's the things that UK universities are responding to. So it's not only undergraduates that are now having the chance to do an internship, it's moved to postgraduates as well. Just finally, I'll leave you with a case study of one of our graduates from a design background. Before I go into this, does anybody know what ergonomics is? Okay, 1 or 2 people. So, in fact, ergonomics is a very niche area looking at human factors and how the user interacts with a product or a service. And it also links into things like psychology, sociology, economics even. So it's quite a niche course, and with that in mind, it's very hard to find jobs in the UK within this area. The reason why we've put Saranch up there is that he has applied for many jobs in the UK, and it has been quite difficult for him. But very recently, he got 2 job offers, and now he is working in London for an advertising agency, having spent a lot of time with our careers service. The reason why it's quite a hefty quote, but the reason why I've left it in is that there are a lot of students who worry that even if they're offered the job, what happens with the visa? We take care of that. Okay, so we help students with the visas. Okay, we have supports there to work on it. It's not a guarantee, but particularly those companies that are a little bit more perhaps unfamiliar with the visa process, those companies need a bit of help, and that's what our UK careers teams are doing. They're basically giving that advice to companies. I feel I've been talking for quite a long time, so I'm going to hand over to my colleague Jessica, who's going to introduce what it will be, what the options would be to work during your study and after your studies. Thank you for listening.
Okay, good morning. Good morning. I'm going to conclude the session by talking about everyone's favourite topic, which is visas. So please stay with me. So first of all, we've talked about students working as part of the course, but what happens if a student wants to take a part-time job as well? Well, that is completely possible within the visa that a student will come on to study in the UK, which is called a Tier 4 student visa. The visa that they're studying on does also permit the student to work part-time alongside the course of study. And there is a maximum number of hours a student can work per week on the Tier 4 visa, which is 20 hours a week in term time. And then in the vacation time, there is no limit to the number of hours, so they can work as much as they like. So talking about the summer holidays and the Christmas and Easter breaks, lots of our international students do work full-time in those vacation periods. Now, 20 hours is actually quite a lot. Most of my colleagues here, I think, wouldn't recommend a student works 20 hours a week because an undergraduate degree is meant to be equivalent to a full-time job in terms of the number of hours per week they're meant to be studying. So it's really all about balancing studies alongside the job. Lots of our international students work part-time, maybe 4, 5, sometimes 10 hours a week. We certainly wouldn't recommend any more than 15, 16 hours. 20 hours is the absolute maximum, but that doesn't mean they have to work 20 hours. In terms of how much money a student can earn working part-time, there is a national minimum wage in the UK that every company has to stick to. So it's illegal to pay a student any less than this. So if the student is under 20 years old, the minimum wage is £5.90 per hour. And if they're between 21 and 24 years old, £7.38 is the minimum hourly wage that they could expect. Obviously, that's the minimum. Many jobs will pay considerably more than that, depending on the nature of the work that the student is doing. Obviously, it's ideal for a student to find part-time work which is related to their course, but obviously there are many other seasonal jobs and other job types available as well. And obviously, the benefits of working part-time, not only can the student boost their wallet, earn a bit of money, but also they're going to be boosting their employability skills as well, adding to that LinkedIn profile that we've been talking about, their CV. Also trying out different types of job. You know, they may think they want a career in marketing, and then they do a part-time job in that area and they find that it's not for them. So it can be a really good sort of research tool as well to try out different career ideas. So I think it's fair to say most universities will have some form of on-campus recruitment service, either embedded within their careers team, or like at Nottingham, we have a separate organisation which is called Unitemps. And Unitemps can be found on other campuses as well, I think in Birmingham and Warwick. And it is an on-campus recruitment agency. The student would need to register with Unitemps, and then they would get access to all of the different part-time opportunities that Unitemps have on their books. And international students can access all of the jobs exactly the same as home students can. So there's a really interesting range of assignments offered by Unitemps. So Types of jobs available might include marketing, administrative jobs, events and hospitality is a big one, but also things like translation projects and other project work. And some excellent rates of pay, like I've said, the minimum wage, but then all the way up to one job we were advertising recently, $13.44 an hour, which is pretty decent wage for a student. In the international office where I work, we employ 35 international students on a part-time basis as international student ambassadors. And they get to work on a really interesting range of roles, including social media work, blogging, giving presentations to visitors, campus tours, all sorts of interesting activities there. So that's just one example of a type of campus job that a student could look to realistically get. I think we've touched on this already, that most universities will have a careers and employability service. This is free, so we do really encourage your students to go and find the careers service as soon as they can. Plenty of students leave it until the final year and then they panic and they think, oh, where's that careers service I've been hearing about? So we do encourage them to go and find it in year one, have a chat with the careers advisors and get access to this whole range of different support that is completely free and available to them. At Nottingham, our graduates have access to our careers service for life. So as a Nottingham alumnus, I'm still able to use our careers service now if I need it. So some universities do offer that as well. Something we haven't actually mentioned is volunteering, and I wouldn't underestimate the power of volunteering in terms of building employability skills as well. So do encourage your students to get involved with volunteering schemes. I think every university will have something that students can get involved with. And then obviously the access to the on-campus events, advice on CVs, but also interview skills preparation, advice on assessment centres, psychometric tests that a lot of the big companies will expect students to do. An international student and a home student going into a psychometric test, they're not going to be assessed any differently on their status in terms of their nationality. Companies like PwC, Deloitte, they're looking for the students that do the best on these assessments, regardless of their nationality. So we do a lot in terms of psychometric test preparation as well. Okay, so going back to visas, just briefly, what happens after graduation? Well, you may be aware that a Tier 4 visa is valid for 4 months after the end of the course itself. But as Robin has touched on, we do encourage students not to wait until those final 4 months to start looking for jobs. The majority of our international students do return home after they've completed their studies. However, there are several visa routes in the UK by which students can remain and work. And the main one is the Tier 2 General Working Visa, which is needed for full-time employment in the UK if you are a non-EU national. Now, in order to obtain a Tier 2 visa, students really need 2 things. The first is a job offer from a company in the UK who's willing to pay the minimum salary required for that particular sector, and the salaries do vary by sector. And the Home Office does have a public register of employers who sponsor Tier 2 visas. So that's publicly available on the gov.uk website, and there are hundreds of employers in the UK that will sponsor a Tier 2 visa. Tier 2 visa is limited for a maximum of 5 years, but is usually issued by a specific employer for a specific job, so the duration of the visa can vary, but the maximum of 5 years, after which the student can look at other options such as permanent residency. Okay, another route that we really push at Nottingham, we're very famous for our entrepreneurship, and we have over 20 students a year that take up our graduate entrepreneur visa at Nottingham. And across the UK, there are over 2,000 places for students who are graduating and want to remain in the UK to set up their own business. So what they will need to do is approach their university with a business plan and evidence of some funding. And then the university will shortlist applicants that they wish to sponsor on the graduate entrepreneur route. And this can include undergraduate students as well as postgraduates. So many students are taking up this opportunity now. We have some Indian students in our Ingenuity Lab, which is where our entrepreneur visa is sponsored from. And they're really thriving in terms of setting up their own business, and they can earn money during that time as well. So it's a really good opportunity for many students, and not a lot of students know about that route. And then the final route I'm just going to talk about is the Tier 5 visa. This is a short-term temporary employment route where students can gain 6 months working on paid internship opportunities. So again, gaining those really valuable transferable skills and experience. And there are over 70 organisations in the UK that can sponsor the Tier 5 internship visa route, including, I've just included one here, which is BUNAC, that sponsor working holiday reps. So people that want to get involved in the travel industry, interning with BUNAC is a really good option for them. Okay, so I'm just concluding here with some websites which may be useful for your students if they are interested in remaining to work in the UK. You may have already heard of the first one, which is UKISA. UKISA is a fantastic resource for international students. It has all sorts of advice on there, everything from coping with homesickness when you're a student to working in the UK during and after your studies. So do encourage your students to have a look on the UKISA site. And then the second two are job sites for students that want to stay and work in the UK on Tier 2 visas. The second one, Student Circus, advertises internships and jobs with UK companies who will offer Tier 2 sponsorship. So do encourage your students to check those out. And I think that's all we've got time for today. Thank you very much for listening. And I think we have a couple of minutes for questions if I can invite the other panellists to join me. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your patience today as well. I know a lot of you have had to stand up for this time as well. We are in the way of you and cups of tea and coffee. So, but we're also here if you wanted to ask individual questions, not to the wider audience. We'll be here for another 5 minutes or so. Does anybody have any questions for the panel? Yes, sir.
On a general, in the UK, do universities, when they take undergrads, does the internship translate into academic credit?
So for the vast majority of universities, because the internship is an option, it's not normally credit bearing. However, I think there was an example from the University of Bristol this morning of a module. I think it was 20 credits, was it? So some would if it's taken as part of a 3-year degree, for example, but the vast majority that are taking an optional internship year or a study abroad year, it's not normally credit bearing, but as we've mentioned, some universities offer a diploma or a qualification alongside that. Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Yes.
During internships, do you support and the faculty support students, and how do you do that?
So what we would find is that students either have an idea of the company they'd like to work with, or they're perhaps a bit unsure and they don't know how to go about it. So what we find is that quite often university faculties have colleagues, as we have an example here, who would work very closely with students in identifying a suitable placement for them relevant to the degree. And they may have contacts in the industry or have had companies that have taken those students previously. Alongside that, there will be the central careers network or careers service who would offer more of the skill setting in terms of the CV writing, the workshops. I remember one student a few years ago, I remember a careers officer telling me that even a little bit of cultural differences can play a part in a visa interview. So a student from Delhi was in an interview with KPMG, and the officer said to him, is that all? Do you understand? Are you happy with everything? And he said, yes, sir. And the guy said, so you don't understand? And he said, yes, sir. And the guy was like, are you wasting my time? And he's like, no, sir. And it's the cultural difference of perhaps not everybody in the UK understanding what little things in India, what they mean. And it's a really small example, and that student did get the job, so that's not the reason why there was an issue. But there was a bit of hesitation. The student is thinking, this guy thinks I'm crazy, what's happening? And it's that little thing, that little cultural difference, even with a big firm, you know, it is something that we try and iron out during the application process, and the careers team can give some guidance and feedback and examples of how to go about things as well.
So my question really, let me rephrase that. Once the internship starts, does the faculty actually support and how, not just the career services, but does the faculty support and how?
I mean, maybe I could just jump in there quickly. Yes, so yes is basically the answer. So where we've brokered for the sort of schemes I was talking about, either the credit-bearing placements or the paid internships, then yes, we check in and check in with the partner organisation and check in with the student to check things are going well, and then have a feedback process afterwards. So yes is the answer to that. As well as everything Rob said, there is a huge amount of surrounding support, preparation, and so on as well from Central Career Service. I think that would go for any university. I think, yeah.
So looking into this internship opportunities, I would like to know I'm sure there would be a support system for students who are very keen on research. We do understand not everyone in the class would be interested, but there will be two or three students who will be very keen, and the teachers can definitely identify them, right, at the first year. How is the support system for them? So
research, sorry.
It could be a research-based internship, if I can call that.
Well, do you want me to quickly? Bristol actually has a research-based internship scheme. I think it's called IRIS, but it's specifically for students like that who want to work actually in the university alongside academic researchers. And actually, we're currently talking about a kind of a related scheme that might be for sort of engaged external research when there are collaborative projects to add student interns to those projects. That's just a sort of idea that may go forward. But in a way, the fact of those things kind of reflects what I was saying at the beginning of more and more of this kind of thing happening. So if we gave the same presentation in a year's time, there would probably be a bigger list of those kinds of things we're doing. Does anyone else want to step in there?
Does that answer your question, or is it more in regards to general support for those who are not quite sure about the internship? That's okay. Okay,
yeah.
Perfect. Yes.
You may not have this data or may not, track this, but in terms of international students graduating from your universities, do you track what percentage approximately end up getting sponsorship for those tier 2 or, the non-temporary, non-6-month, like tier 2 or tier 1 visas?
I think we wouldn't necessarily be able to say X amount from the UK or X amount from universities. We've all got really good examples of students. It's sometimes quite hard to track because we can obviously support those students, but normally when they leave, if they're still on university email addresses and things like that, it is quite hard to track. They don't always let us know what's happening. We do quite often find out about it and put them in case studies, but I don't think we'd necessarily be able to give a certain statistic, although it's certainly increasing. Just anecdotally, talking to many delegates, they're all always coming up with examples of that. So it's certainly, as students are perhaps becoming more focused on jobs and taking internships, usually that correlates into a more positive percentage of those who are finding jobs.
I would just add, we would absolutely love to have a percentage, the number of students we interact with who want that data, and it's something we're constantly feeding back to our careers service, that's really what's needed. The universities are legally bound to report on the destinations of UK and EU graduates, and that's something we report. We have to track those graduates. It's 6 months, I think it is, and then a couple of years after. But currently, international students aren't included in that survey, and that's something we're really pushing for. So every university will be able to give you a statistic on the UK and EU outcomes. International graduate outcomes at the moment, as Rob said, it's more case studies and the students that we can keep track of. We will report on those, but I don't think there's any UK university currently, unfortunately, that could give you an accurate percentage like that. But
Thank you.
hopefully in a few years we'll be able to do that for you.
We've probably got time for one more question. Okay, we'll let you enjoy your coffee. Thank you for your time, and also a big thanks to the panellists for their time and the insights they've given us today. Thank you very much.